It was the winter of 2023 when I started feeling like I was living next to my own relationship instead of inside it. We were in Maplewood, New Jersey, in a small second-floor apartment above a bakery that made the whole stairwell smell like sugar and burnt butter every morning. It should have been one of those cozy, predictable seasons where nothing really surprises you. But something was wrong. Not in a way you can point to. Not in the obvious way people talk about online, where someone comes home late and smells like perfume that isn't theirs. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of wrong that makes you doubt yourself because you can't explain it without sounding paranoid. For a few weeks, she had been distant. That's the word I used at the time because it felt fair. Not cruel, not angry. Just elsewhere. Like her body was present and her mind was sitting in another room with the door closed. We'd be on the couch, and she'd laugh at something on her phone, and I'd look over, expecting her to share it, and she wouldn't. Not because she was hiding it, at least, that's what I told myself. More like she forgot I was there. When I asked her how her day was, she'd answer quickly, like she was checking a box. Fine. Busy. Then she'd turn the question back on me, but her eyes would slide away before I finished my first sentence. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a fight. It was absence. And then, almost overnight, she changed. It started a couple of weeks before the holidays, right after one of those evenings where we barely spoke and I went to bed feeling like I'd done something wrong without knowing what. The next day, she was bright. Not just in a good mood, different. She touched my shoulder when she walked past me in the kitchen, like she needed to make sure I was still there. She complimented me in ways that didn't sound like her. Things she'd never really said before. You always take care of things, she told me while I was rinsing a coffee mug. It wasn't even about anything special. Just a mug. She leaned her chin on my shoulder like we were in a commercial. I remember smiling because what else do you do when someone you love is suddenly warm again? I told myself this was what I wanted. That the weird little distance spell was over. But the warmth didn't feel like warmth. It felt like performance. She started explaining things without being asked. If she went to the store, she'd give me a full report when she got back. What traffic was like. What aisle was crowded. Who she ran into. How long she waited in line. If she had to stop somewhere else, she'd mention it twice, like she was making sure it landed. I just don't want you to think anything, she said once, laughing a little too hard. I wasn't thinking anything, I said, because I wasn't. Not yet. Not clearly. Then there was her phone. I'm not someone who believes in checking phones. I never have. Even saying it now makes me feel a little embarrassed, like I'm admitting to being the kind of person who counts receipts and tracks location dots. We never had that kind of relationship. We were casual about devices. If mine was charging in the bedroom and I needed to look something up, I'd use hers. If she needed to change the song in the car, she'd grab my phone without asking. That stopped. Not in a loud way. In 1,000 tiny movements. Her phone started living face down on every surface. If it lit up, her hand would reach for it before the screen fully brightened. If she had to use it near me, she'd angle it away, like she was shielding it from glare. Like it mattered. At night, she used to plug it in on the nightstand. Now she kept it on her side, under her pillow sometimes, which was weird. Who does that? It's uncomfortable. It's hot. It presses into your cheek. One evening I walked into the living room and she startled so hard her phone almost flew out of her hand. She laughed immediately to cover it. God, you scared me, she said, like I'd jumped out at her. I hadn't. I was carrying laundry. Sorry, I said, and she went right back to tapping, but her shoulders stayed tense. Little things kept stacking. She took more showers at odd times. Not after working out or cleaning. Just random. She'd say she wanted to reset or feel fresh. She started wearing perfume to places she never used to wear perfume, like running to pick up a prescription or meeting a friend for coffee. And she was sweet. That was the confusing part. She was sweeter than she'd been in months. She'd ask if I'd eaten. She'd bring home my favorite snacks. She'd apologize faster when we disagreed. She'd say things like, "I'm really glad we're us," in the middle of ordinary moments, like folding towels. One night, we were washing dishes side by side, and she looked at me with this serious expression, like she had something huge to say, and then she just said, "You're a good person." My stomach tightened, just a little. It was too heavy for the moment. "Okay," I said, trying to smile. "You too." She nodded quickly, like that was enough, and turned back to the sink. There's a type of guilt that makes people mean. And there's a type that makes them generous. I didn't understand that then. I just knew that I felt like I was being handled carefully. Like glass. I didn't confront her. Not because I was scared, exactly. More because I didn't know what I'd be confronting. If I said, "You've been acting weird," she could say I was imagining it. If I said, "You're hiding something," she could say I didn't trust her. And then suddenly I'd be the villain for noticing. So I did something I'm not proud of and not ashamed of, all at the same time. I watched. I watched her like you watch weather when you think it might turn. Not accusing the sky of anything. Just noticing the wind. The way the air changes before rain. I started keeping track of her stories in my head. Not in a detective way. In an, I want to understand, way. If she said she'd been at her friend's place, I'd remember the name she used. If she said they watched a movie, I'd remember which one. Not so I could catch her. I told myself it was so I could keep up, so I could be a better partner, so I could show interest. But a part of me, quiet, stubborn, was collecting the pieces on instinct. I also watched myself. I noticed how often I swallowed down questions. How often I forced my face to stay neutral when something didn't add up. How I'd lie awake listening to her breathe, wondering why my body felt tense when everything on the surface was fine. There were moments where I almost said something. Where the words sat at the back of my throat like a stone. One of those moments happened in a grocery store parking lot. We were loading bags into the trunk and her phone buzzed. I saw the screen light up. A name popped up I didn't recognize. Just a first name. Nothing dramatic, nothing obviously romantic. But she snatched the phone so fast her keys clinked against it. Her smile didn't change. That was the scary part. She kept smiling. "Who's that?" I asked, trying to sound casual, like I didn't care. She blinked once, too slow. "Oh, just someone from work. They're asking about a schedule thing." "That late?" I said. It wasn't even that late, but it was late enough to ask. She shrugged and laughed again. "You know how people are." And then she leaned in and kissed my cheek like she was sealing the answer shut. We drove home with holiday music on the radio, and she sang along like nothing had happened. Like my question had been a normal thing and her answer had been normal too. Like my chest wasn't tight. Like my hands weren't gripping the steering wheel harder than they needed to. When we got back, she was cheerful. She offered to cook. She asked me what I wanted to watch. She sat close enough that our knees touched, and when I shifted even slightly away, she scooted closer, almost urgently. It should have made me feel loved. Instead, it made me feel like something was chasing her. That night, when she fell asleep, I stared at the ceiling and tried to force myself into a simple conclusion: we're fine. I'm overthinking. Everyone goes through weird phases. Stress does strange things. But my body didn't believe the story my mind was telling it. And in that gap, between what I wanted to believe and what I felt, I made a decision that would shape everything that came after. I wasn't going to accuse her without certainty. I wasn't going to beg for honesty from someone who didn't want to give it. So I stayed quiet. I kept my voice steady. I kept my questions small. I let her be sweet. I let her be careful. I let her build whatever she was building right in front of me, and I told myself I was being patient. But deep down, I knew I wasn't waiting for reassurance. I was waiting for the truth to show its face on its own. Before any of that winter happened, before I started noticing the strange softness and the guarded silences, our relationship had felt easy. Not perfect. Not like a movie. Just solid. We met in our early 20s, at a point in life where everything still felt unfinished. We were both figuring out work, money, what kind of adults we were supposed to become. We didn't start with fireworks. It was more like a slow recognition. She was someone I liked being around even when nothing was happening. That was the foundation. Ordinary time. We'd sit in the same room doing separate things. I'd scroll through my phone or half-watch something on TV while she painted her nails or talked about some random story from her day. It wasn't exciting, but it was comforting. Like we didn't have to perform for each other. The first year was full of small rituals. Coffee runs. Grocery trips. Late-night drives when we couldn't sleep. We learned each other's patterns without even trying. She liked her towels folded a certain way. I always forgot, and she'd roll her eyes, smiling, and redo them. I always left cabinet doors open. She'd close them behind me, muttering like an annoyed roommate. It was stupid stuff, but it became our language. We didn't have dramatic breakups or big betrayals early on. That was part of why I trusted her the way I did. Our problems were normal problems. Miscommunication. Busy weeks. The occasional argument about something pointless that turned into an apology an hour later. I'd dated people before her, but those relationships always felt uncertain. Like I was guessing what I meant to them. With her, I didn't feel that. She was steady in the beginning. She'd look me in the eye when she talked. She'd say what she meant. If she was upset, she didn't disappear. If I was stressed, she noticed. And I noticed her too. I learned what made her quiet. What made her anxious. What kind of compliments she brushed off and which ones she secretly needed. She wasn't someone who asked for help easily, but she softened when you offered it anyway. That made me want to be better. Over time, we built something that didn't feel fragile. We moved in together after a couple years. Not in some big romantic leap. More like it made sense. We were already spending most nights together. We were already sharing groceries, sharing closets, sharing mornings. The first apartment wasn't much. Thin walls. Noisy neighbors. A heater that made strange clicking sounds. But it was ours. We bought cheap furniture and joked about how temporary it all looked. We made pasta on weeknights and ate it out of mismatched bowls. We hosted friends on folding chairs. I remember thinking, this is what life is. This is the part people don't post. It was real. And because it was real, I trusted it. There's a kind of closeness that forms when you see someone in their most unglamorous moments. When you watch them get sick, when you hear them cry over something they don't want to admit matters, when you're there for the boring days and not just the fun ones. I saw her exhausted. I saw her proud. I saw her insecure. I saw her relaxed. And she saw me too. I never felt like I had to compete for her attention. I never felt like I was auditioning. We talked about the future in that casual way couples do when they assume time is promised. Maybe we'd move somewhere bigger. Maybe we'd travel more. Maybe we'd get a dog. The details didn't matter as much as the tone. It was always, we. And maybe that's what made it feel safe. The shared language of assumption. Looking back, I can admit something I didn't understand then. Comfort can make you careless. When you're with someone for years, you stop checking. Not in a suspicious way. In an emotional way. You stop asking, "Are we okay?" because you think the answer is obvious. You stop noticing the effort because it becomes the air you breathe. I didn't think she would hurt me. Not because I thought she was incapable of it, but because the version of us I carried in my head didn't include that outcome. It wasn't arrogance. It was faith. Our relationship wasn't built on grand gestures. It was built on familiarity. It was built on being chosen in the smallest ways, over and over again, until you start to believe that choice is permanent. Even when things got stressful, even when life felt heavy, I always assumed we'd come back to center. Because that's what we did. I knew her family. She knew mine. We had friends who thought of us as a unit. We had routines that belonged to both of us. There was a kind of invisible glue holding everything together. And when you live inside that kind of structure, you don't imagine it collapsing from one quiet crack. You imagine it will last because it always has. That's what made the shift so confusing later. That's what made her sudden sweetness feel like a gift at first instead of a warning. I didn't know how quickly something familiar could become unfamiliar. I didn't know how easily trust could become a blind spot. And I didn't realize, back then, that the very safety I believed in was the reason I wouldn't see the truth coming until it was already standing right beside me. The first sign wasn't betrayal. Not directly. It was distance, dressed up as normal life. At the time, I didn't think, "She's leaving me." I didn't think, "There's someone else." I thought what people always think when something feels off but you still want to be reasonable. Stress. Routine. A phase. We'd been together long enough that it felt almost inevitable we'd hit a quieter stretch. Couples do. Life gets busy, the excitement settles, you stop doing certain things without even noticing. So when she started pulling back a little, I told myself not to overreact. It started in small ways. She stopped reaching for me first. If I kissed her, she kissed me back, but it felt delayed, like she had to remind herself to return it. If I asked how she was feeling, she'd answer, but her tone stayed surface level. Just tired. Works a lot. I'm fine. Fine became her favorite word. And I didn't know what to do with it, because fine sounds like a wall that you're not allowed to question. Our conversations shortened. We used to talk in bed before falling asleep, not about anything profound, just whatever came up. Stories, jokes, plans for the weekend. Now she'd scroll on her phone until her eyes got heavy and then turn over without much comment. Sometimes she'd say, "Sorry, I'm just exhausted," and I'd tell her it was okay, because what else could I say? It was okay. Until it didn't feel okay. There was a change in her attention. Not just toward me, but toward everything around us. She'd laugh less. Or maybe she still laughed, just not with me. She'd stare into space when I spoke, then blink and say, "What?" like she'd been pulled out of a different world. I'd repeat myself, pretending not to care. But I cared. I started noticing gaps. She'd leave the room to take calls. Not every time, and not dramatically, but enough that it registered. Before, she'd answer the phone wherever she was. Now she'd step onto the balcony or into the hallway. When she came back, her expression would be smooth, almost too smooth. I didn't ask who it was. I didn't want to be that person. And honestly, I didn't want the answer. There's a strange thing people don't talk about much. Sometimes you can feel a relationship shifting before you understand why. It's like walking into a room where the furniture has been rearranged slightly. Everything is technically the same, but your body knows something has moved. That's how it felt. She wasn't cruel. That was part of what made it confusing. She didn't insult me. She didn't pick fights. She didn't slam doors or threaten to leave. She was polite. Almost overly polite. If I asked her to do something, she'd say, "Sure," with a small smile. If I suggested dinner, she'd agree. If I told her I missed her, she'd say, "I know," and hug me briefly. Everything sounded correct. Everything felt hollow. It was like she was playing the role of girlfriend instead of being one. And because she wasn't doing anything obviously wrong, I began turning the discomfort inward. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was boring lately. Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough. I'd find myself doing small things for her, just to feel something back. Bringing her coffee. Asking extra questions. Offering to run errands with her. Sometimes she'd soften, and for a second, I'd feel relief. Then she'd drift again. And I'd be left staring at the empty space where connection used to be. The hardest part was how normal everything still looked from the outside. We still went to family events. Still posted the occasional picture. Still sat next to each other at dinners with friends. People would smile and say, "You two are so good together." And she'd smile back, perfectly. I started wondering if this was just what long-term love became. Not passion, not warmth, just coexistence. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that. Because even the quiet seasons we'd had before still felt shared. This didn't. This felt private. Like she was carrying something she wouldn't put down. One night, I asked her directly, as gently as I could. "Are we okay?" She looked at me like she was surprised I'd asked. "Yeah," she said quickly. "Of course." I waited. She added, "Why wouldn't we be?" I almost said, "Because you feel miles away even when you're right here." But instead I shrugged, forcing a laugh. "No reason. Just checking." She leaned over and kissed my forehead, like you reassure a child. "I'm just stressed," she said. "Don't overthink. Don't overthink." That became another phrase that stuck to me. Because when someone tells you not to overthink, it doesn't calm you down. It makes you wonder what thinking would reveal. After that, I stopped asking. Not because I didn't care. Because I cared too much. I started observing instead of talking, listening more than speaking. The distance wasn't loud. It was wrapped in politeness, in exhaustion, in perfectly reasonable explanations. But even then, in the quietest part of it, I could feel something slipping. And I couldn't tell yet if it was just us growing apart. Or something being kept from me. The shift didn't stay quiet for long. After weeks of distance that I kept trying to rationalize, something else happened. She came back. Not fully. Not naturally. But suddenly. It was like watching someone return to a room they'd already left, moving too carefully, smiling too much, acting like nothing had changed. At first, I felt relief. I remember thinking, maybe I was wrong. Maybe she really was just stressed. Maybe this is us finding our way back. But the way she returned didn't feel like closeness. It felt like overcorrection. One morning, I was making coffee before work, still half asleep, and she came up behind me and wrapped her arms around my waist. "You smell good," she said. It caught me off guard because it wasn't something she usually said. Not that she never complimented me, but this was different. Too deliberate. I smiled anyway. "Thanks," I said. She held on for an extra second, then kissed my shoulder and walked away like nothing happened. Later that day, she texted me twice in a row. "Just checking on you. Hope your day's going okay." It wasn't strange on its own. Couples text. But it was the sudden frequency, the careful tone, like she was keeping a record. That night, she asked about my day with this intense focus, nodding at every detail like she was studying. I'd mention a meeting, and she'd say, "Oh yeah? What happened?" I'd talk about a coworker, and she'd respond, that must have been frustrating. It was nice. Too nice. It made me feel guilty for ever doubting her. And maybe that was part of it. She started complimenting me randomly. "You're really patient. You always know what to do. I don't tell you enough how much I appreciate you." The words were soft, but they landed heavy. Because appreciation is one thing. But this felt like reassurance. Like she was trying to convince herself of something as much as she was trying to convince me. Then came the explaining. That was harder to ignore. If she went out, she'd come back with an entire timeline. I left around 4. Traffic was horrible. I stopped at the pharmacy because I remembered I needed toothpaste. Then I ran into Jenna for a second, so we talked, but not long. Then I came straight home. I'd blink, confused. "Okay," I'd say. "Sounds normal." She'd laugh quickly. "I just didn't want you wondering where I was." I wasn't wondering. Not until she said that. It started happening more. If she was late by 10 minutes, she'd apologize like she'd been gone for hours. If her phone rang and she didn't answer, she'd explain why. "It's probably nothing. Just someone from work." If she stepped outside, she'd announce it. "I'm just getting some air." Everything was narrated. Everything was justified. It made the air in the apartment feel tighter, like there was no room for silence. And then there was her phone. That was the strangest part because it wasn't aggressive secrecy. It was anxious secrecy. She stopped leaving it lying around. Before, her phone would sit on the counter, abandoned while she cooked or showered. Now it stayed with her like an extra limb. If she stood up, it stood up. If she went to the bathroom, it went with her. If we sat together on the couch, she'd hold it close, screen angled just slightly away. Not dramatically. Just enough. Once, we were watching something mindless on TV, and her phone buzzed. The screen lit up, and I saw a notification pop up. I didn't even catch the name. But I saw her reaction. Her whole body went still, like an animal hearing a sound in the woods. Then, instantly, she flipped it over. Too fast. I pretended I didn't notice. My heart didn't. Another night, she fell asleep holding it. Not charging on the nightstand. Not on the dresser. In her hand. The glow dimmed as her grip loosened, but she never fully let go. I lay there beside her, staring at the ceiling, feeling something cold settle in my chest. It wasn't proof. It was behavior. And behavior doesn't convict anyone. But it whispers. The softness continued. She cooked dinner more often, even meals she knew I loved but we hadn't had in months. She asked if I wanted dessert. She offered massages. She leaned into me more, laughed louder, kissed me first. The affection wasn't fake, exactly. That's what made it complicated. It felt real in the moment. But it also felt placed. Like furniture arranged neatly to hide a stain underneath. One evening, she sat beside me while I was reading and rested her head on my shoulder. "I'm really lucky," she said quietly. I swallowed. "Yeah?" She nodded. "To have you." It should have been comforting. Instead, it made my stomach twist. Because people don't usually say things like that out of nowhere unless something is pressing on them. I looked down at her. "You okay?" I asked. She lifted her head too quickly, eyes bright. "Yeah. I'm good. I'm just feeling emotional lately. You know how it is." I didn't. But I nodded anyway. There was an urgency in her kindness, like she was racing against something. Like she needed me secure. Like she needed to be sure I wasn't going anywhere. And the more she tried to create safety, the more I felt unsafe. It was backwards. I started noticing how often she watched my face. If she told me she was going out, she'd study my reaction. If she was on her phone, she'd glance at me, checking. It was subtle, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. She wasn't just hiding something. She was tracking whether she was getting away with it. That realization didn't come as anger. Not yet. It came as a quiet weight. Because the person next to me still looked like her. Still sounded like her. Still laughed at the same jokes. But something had shifted in the space between us. And I began to understand that the distance wasn't the problem. The distance had been the beginning. This strange softness. This careful affection. It was something else entirely. And for the first time, I stopped asking myself if I was imagining things. I started asking myself what she was trying so hard to keep buried. I didn't go looking for proof. That's the part one always have to explain, even to myself. I didn't wake up one morning with some plan to catch her. I didn't suddenly become the kind of person who digs through pockets or checks passwords. I wasn't trying to build a case. I think, deep down, I was still hoping I was wrong. Because suspicion is exhausting. It makes you feel like a worse version of yourself. And once you cross a certain line, you can't go back to innocence. So I stayed in that uncomfortable middle space, where your instincts are loud but your brain keeps asking for evidence. Then one night, evidence arrived anyway. It was ordinary. That's what makes it hard to describe, because the moment that changed everything wasn't cinematic. There was no storm outside. No screaming. No dramatic reveal. It was just an errand. We'd been talking about holiday plans, the kind of conversation couples have on autopilot. Visiting family. Buying gifts. Pretending the rest of life isn't happening under the surface. She mentioned she needed to print a couple of documents for something work-related. Her printer at the apartment had been broken for weeks, so she usually used her laptop to send things to a shop downtown. I needed to print something too, something stupid, insurance paperwork, I think. Something that didn't matter. So I said, casually, "Hey, can I use your laptop later? Mine's dead." "Yeah, of course," she said quickly. Too quickly. Then added, "It's on the table." That was it. Nothing suspicious. Just a laptop. Later that evening, she stepped out to take a call. She said it was her sister. Maybe it was. I didn't even think about it in the moment. She grabbed her coat, her phone, and walked into the hallway. The apartment got quiet. I sat at the dining table with her laptop, the screen still warm from earlier. I wasn't nervous yet. I wasn't sweating or shaking. I was just trying to print paperwork. I opened the browser because I needed to download a form. Her email was already logged in. So was everything else. We'd never been secretive about that before. It wasn't unusual for one of us to leave something signed in. It had always felt harmless. Until it didn't. A notification popped up in the corner of the screen. Just a little rectangle. A message preview. I didn't even read it fully at first. My eyes just registered the shape of it, the fact that it existed, the way her name wasn't the only one in the conversation. Then my brain caught up. The preview wasn't about schedules. It wasn't about family. It was familiar. Not the words exactly. The tone. Soft. Intimate. The kind of casual closeness that doesn't belong to strangers. My hand froze on the mouse. I could have closed the laptop right then. I could have told myself it was nothing. But I didn't. I clicked. I wish I could tell you it was some long, deliberate decision, but it wasn't. It was instinct. Curiosity mixed with dread. A part of me needed to know if I was losing my mind. The message thread opened. There was a name at the top I didn't recognize. Just a first name. No heart emoji. No obvious giveaway. But as soon as I saw the exchange, something in me went still. It wasn't explicit. Not in the way people think. There were no graphic details. That almost made it worse. Because it wasn't some drunken mistake or careless flirtation. It was familiarity. Inside jokes. Little comments that carried weight because they didn't have to explain themselves. And then there were the promises. Not huge promises. Not, "I love you," written out dramatically. More like the quiet kind. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was worth it. You make me feel calm." I stared at the screen, reading only enough to understand what it was. My chest felt strange, like something was pressing down, but also like I'd gone hollow. I scrolled a little. Not far. Just enough. Enough to see that it had been going on longer than a day. Enough to see that she had given someone else the same softness she'd been giving me lately. Enough to know the over-explaining wasn't anxiety. It was covering. The compliments weren't random. They were compensation. I didn't want more. I didn't want every detail burned into my brain. I didn't want to know locations or times or the full shape of it. I just wanted confirmation. And I had it. I closed the laptop. Slowly. Carefully. Like it might explode. The apartment felt too quiet. My ears rang. I sat there for a minute, staring at the wood grain of the table, trying to understand how something could become true so quickly. It's strange, the way betrayal doesn't always feel like anger first. Sometimes it feels like embarrassment. Like your body is ashamed you didn't see it sooner. I thought about all the moments I'd questioned myself. All the times I'd swallowed discomfort. All the nights I'd told myself not to overthink. I wasn't overthinking. I was noticing. And now I knew. The hallway door opened. She came back inside, cheeks pink from the cold. She kicked off her shoes and smiled at me, casual, easy. "Hey," she said. "Did you find what you needed?" My face must have been neutral, because she didn't react. I heard my own voice, steady and normal, like it belonged to someone else. "Yeah. I'm just finishing up." She nodded. "Good." She walked into the kitchen, humming softly. Opened the fridge. Asked if I wanted tea. It was surreal. I sat there, watching her move around like nothing had changed, like the air hadn't shifted completely. I wondered if she knew I knew. I wondered if she could tell. But she kept smiling. And in that moment, I understood something that unsettled me more than the messages themselves. People can live double lives without looking like villains. They can laugh and cook and ask about your day while carrying someone else in their pocket. She handed me a mug of tea. Her fingers brushed mine. "Love you," she said lightly, almost automatic. I looked at her. Really looked. And I realized the person I loved was still standing there. But the relationship I thought we had, that was already gone. I didn't confront her. Not that night. I didn't slam the laptop open and demand answers. I didn't cry or yell or call anyone. I just sat with the truth inside me, heavy and silent, and I listened to her talk about nothing. Because something else had clicked into place too. If she was capable of hiding this, then whatever came next had to be handled carefully. And for reasons I didn't fully understand yet, I knew I wasn't going to react the way she expected. I was going to wait. Not out of weakness. Out of certainty. Because once you see the truth clearly, you don't rush. You decide what to do with it. And I wasn't ready to let her see that I'd already stopped living in the same reality she thought she controlled. The next morning, I woke up like nothing had happened. That sounds impossible, I know. But I didn't have another option. The truth was sitting inside me like a stone, but the world hadn't changed outside the apartment. The bakery downstairs still smelled like sugar. Cars still passed on the street. She still moved around the kitchen like she belonged there. And for the first few hours, I moved with her. She smiled at me over her coffee. "Did you sleep okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. My voice didn't shake. She leaned in and kissed my cheek, quick and light, the same way she had been doing lately. That strange softness. Now I knew what it was. I should have been furious. I should have demanded answers. That's what people expect. That's what movies train you to do. But anger felt useless. Not because it wasn't there. It was. It was sitting underneath everything like heat. But something else was louder. A kind of clarity. Because the betrayal wasn't a question anymore. It was confirmed. And once something is confirmed, there's no urgency to chase it. There's only the question of what kind of ending you want. I didn't want a screaming match. I didn't want her tears to blur what was real. I didn't want to leave that apartment with her voice in my ears calling me dramatic or misunderstanding or overreacting. So I did something that, even now, I struggle to explain. I became better. Not better for her. Better in front of her. I became the version of myself she could not justify losing. At first it was small. I offered to make breakfast. She looked surprised. "You don't have to." "I want to," I said. I cooked eggs, washed the pan immediately, wiped down the counter. She watched me with this soft expression, like relief. Like she was thinking, maybe we're okay. Maybe I fixed it. That week, I listened more. When she talked about work, I asked questions. Not interrogating questions. Normal ones. "How did that meeting go? What happened after? That sounds stressful." She seemed to brighten under the attention. Her shoulders relaxed. She laughed more. And the more she relaxed, the more I understood what I was doing. I was removing the pressure. I was making the apartment safe again. Not safe for us. Safe for her guilt. I started coming home earlier. Not dramatically, just present. If she mentioned needing something, I remembered it. I picked it up without being asked. I folded laundry. I made dinner. She kept thanking me. "You've been so sweet lately," she said one night, leaning against the counter. I smiled. "Just trying." Her eyes held something complicated. Gratitude, maybe. Something else too. She reached for my hand. I let her. That was the hardest part. Letting her touch me like nothing was broken. But I wasn't doing it because I wanted closeness. I was doing it because I wanted truth. There's a difference. I stopped arguing over small things. If she snapped at me, I didn't snap back. If she seemed distracted, I didn't demand attention. I stayed calm. Steady. Patient. It wasn't fake. It was controlled. And control is a strange form of power. I could see the effect it had on her. She started leaning into me more, like she was testing whether the ground was stable. Like she needed reassurance that whatever she'd done hadn't cracked everything beyond repair. She would sit close on the couch, her leg pressed against mine. "You feel far away sometimes," she said once, quietly. I looked at her, heart steady. "I'm here," I answered. It was true. I was physically there. Emotionally, I was somewhere else entirely. As the days passed, something shifted in her. Her anxiety softened into something almost hopeful. The over-explaining decreased, replaced with relief. She didn't clutch her phone as tightly. She smiled more naturally. It was like she believed the danger had passed. And that's when I understood the most unsettling part. She thought my kindness meant ignorance. She thought she was getting away with it. Or maybe she thought she'd stopped in time. That the damage could still be contained. I watched her carry that belief like a blanket. And I kept giving her reasons to feel comfortable. Because comfort makes people careless. One weekend, she mentioned wanting to go out for dinner. Somewhere nice, she said. Just us. I agreed. We went to a small place downtown, warm lighting, quiet music. She dressed up more than usual. She looked beautiful. That hurt in a way I didn't expect. We talked, we ate, we even laughed. At one point she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I don't deserve you, she said softly. My stomach turned. I kept my face neutral. What do you mean? She shook her head quickly, smiling like she'd said too much. You're good to me. I nodded slowly. I could feel it hovering there, the confession she wasn't saying. The guilt pressing against her ribs. But she swallowed it down. Not yet. After dinner, she posted a picture of our food. A harmless thing. But I noticed how quickly she checked her phone afterward, how her smile tightened when it buzzed. Then she put it away. We walked home side by side. She slipped her hand into mine. I held it. I didn't feel love in that moment. I felt time. Like I was watching the final act stretch out in slow motion. Back at the apartment, she seemed lighter than she had in months. She curled against me in bed and whispered, "I'm glad we're okay." I stared into the dark. "We're okay," I repeated. And maybe that was the cruelest part. Because I wasn't lying to hurt her. I was saying what she needed to hear so she'd stop hiding behind fear. So she'd stop being careful. So she'd finally say it herself. The next few weeks became a strange performance of intimacy. I showed up in all the ways she'd been craving. I remembered stories she told me months ago. I asked about her feelings. I reassured her when she seemed uncertain. She started crying more easily at small emotional moments. A song on the radio. A commercial about family. She would wipe her eyes and laugh, embarrassed. "I don't know what's wrong with me," she'd say. I'd pull her close. "It's okay," I told her. And she believed me. That belief grew. The safer she felt, the closer she got. Not just physically. Emotionally. She started lingering after conversations, like she wanted to say something else. Her voice would soften. She'd stare at the floor. Then she'd smile too quickly and change the subject. I could see her guilt swelling, searching for an exit. And I waited. Not with revenge. Not with cruelty. With patience. Because I didn't want her confession ripped out under pressure. I wanted it offered freely. I wanted her to look me in the face and tell the truth, not because she got caught. But because she couldn't carry it anymore. And the strangest part is, during those weeks, she genuinely seemed to fall back into loving me. Or at least into appreciating what she thought she still had. She laughed with me again. She kissed me like she meant it. She called me from work just to hear my voice. And each time, I felt the same quiet thought settle deeper. This is what she could have been before. This is what she's capable of. And she still chose otherwise. Every day I stayed calm, every day I showed up perfectly, I felt something inside me cooling. Not into hatred. Into finality. Because love doesn't always end with an explosion. Sometimes it ends with a slow, clear decision made in silence. And she didn't know yet that I was already standing at the edge of goodbye. She just thought I was becoming the best partner I'd ever been. And maybe I was. Just not for the reason she believed. Not for us. For the moment when she would finally sit down, look at me with tears in her eyes. And tell me what I already knew. It happened on an ordinary night. That's what stays with me. Not a holiday. Not an anniversary. Not some dramatic moment where the universe lined everything up for a confession. Just a Tuesday. Rain against the windows. The apartment warm from the heater. Dinner dishes drying on the rack. We'd been living inside that strange quiet rhythm for weeks, her softness, my patience, both of us pretending the ground wasn't cracked underneath. That night, she was restless. I noticed it the way you notice someone breathing differently beside you. She kept walking from room to room without purpose. She opened the fridge, closed it. Picked up her phone, set it down again. Smoothed the same wrinkle out of the couch cushion twice. I sat at the table, pretending to scroll through something. I wasn't forcing the moment. I was waiting. Finally, she stopped in the doorway of the living room. "Can we talk?" she asked. Her voice was small. My chest tightened, but I kept my face calm. "Yeah," I said. "What's up?" She didn't sit right away. She just stood there, hands clasped in front of her like she didn't know what to do with them. Then she sat down across from me instead of beside me. That alone felt like an answer. For a few seconds, she stared at the floor. I could hear the rain, steady and patient. Then she whispered, "I've been a mess." I didn't respond. I let silence do its job. She swallowed hard. "You've been so good to me lately." I nodded once. "I've noticed you've been stressed," I said carefully. Her eyes flicked up to mine. There was something raw there. She looked like someone standing at the edge of something irreversible. "I don't know how you're still here," she said, voice shaking. My stomach turned, but I stayed still. "Why wouldn't I be?" I asked. She flinched, like the question hurt. Tears gathered quickly, too quickly, like they'd been waiting. "I don't deserve you," she said again, but this time it wasn't a compliment. It was an admission. Her hand started trembling in her lap. And then, finally, it broke. "I did something," she said. The words hung there, fragile. I didn't move. I didn't rush her. "I messed up," she continued, her voice cracking. "I messed up so badly." She covered her mouth for a second like she couldn't believe she was saying it out loud. I watched her carefully. Not with anger. With focus. Because this was the moment everything had been bending toward. "What did you do?" I asked softly. She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't even know how to say it." Another pause. Then, barely above a whisper. "There was someone else." The air changed. Even though I already knew, hearing it from her mouth made it real in a different way. Like the final piece clicking into place. I kept my face steady. Her eyes squeezed shut. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she rushed out. "It was stupid. It was selfish. I hate myself for it." She looked up, desperate. "I didn't want to lose you." I let the silence stretch. Her breathing became uneven. She kept talking, words tumbling over each other. "I've felt sick about it. I've been carrying it every day. I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know why I did it." Her voice rose slightly, panicked. "It wasn't because of you. It wasn't because you weren't enough. You've always been enough." That sentence landed heavily. Not comforting. Just tragic. She wiped her face quickly, embarrassed by the mess of tears. "I was confused," she said. "I felt, I don't know, distant, and instead of talking to you like an adult, I did something horrible." She looked like she wanted me to interrupt, to yell, to give her something solid. I didn't. So she kept going. "It didn't mean anything," she said, then immediately shook her head like she knew how meaningless that sounded. "No, that's not true. It meant something in the moment, but it wasn't real. It wasn't love. It was escape. She pressed her palms into her eyes. I hate that I let it happen. My hands were still on the table. I could feel my pulse, slow and steady. She looked at me again, voice breaking completely. I know I ruined everything. She inhaled shakily. But I want to fix it. There it was. The pivot. The plea. I want to do the work, she said. I'll go to therapy. I'll cut them off. I'll prove it to you. I'll do anything. She leaned forward slightly, like she could close the distance with effort alone. Please, she whispered. I studied her face. This was real remorse. Not theatrical. Not manipulative in the obvious way. She looked like someone drowning in her own choices. But remorse doesn't undo betrayal. It only proves it happened. I spoke carefully. How long? I asked. She hesitated. That hesitation said everything. Not that long, she whispered. I nodded slowly. And you were going to tell me? Her face crumpled. I wanted to, she said. I tried. Every time I looked at you, I couldn't. She let out a broken sound, half sob. You were being so good to me. I didn't understand why. That almost made me laugh, but there was nothing funny in it. She took a shaky breath. I don't deserve another chance, she said. But I'm asking anyway. Her voice softened. I love you. There it was. The line people think changes things. The line people expect to bring someone back. I looked at her for a long time. And I think she saw something in my stillness that frightened her more than anger would have. Because I wasn't reacting the way she imagined. I wasn't exploding. I wasn't bargaining. I wasn't begging for explanations. I was calm. Almost too calm. She wiped her cheeks again, voice trembling. Say something, she pleaded. So I did. I nodded slowly, like I was listening, like I was taking it in. I hear you, I said. A flicker of hope crossed her face. I know you're hurt, she rushed out. I know I broke your trust, but I swear I'm ready to be honest. No more secrets. No more hiding. She swallowed hard. I want us. I want our life. She reached across the table, hesitating before touching my hand. Her fingers were warm. Mine were cold. I'm so sorry, she whispered again. I let her hold my hand. I let her believe, for a moment, that the confession was the hardest part. That once the truth was out, healing could begin. She sat there crying, waiting for punishment or forgiveness. Waiting for the story to follow the script she'd imagined. And I realized something quietly as I watched her. She thought the confession was the end of the lie. She didn't know it was the beginning of the end. Because the only thing she hadn't accounted for was that I wasn't hearing this for the first time. She sat there with my hand in hers like it was an anchor. Her eyes were red. Her breathing uneven. The table between us suddenly felt too small and impossibly wide at the same time. For a moment, she looked almost relieved. Like saying it out loud had taken a weight off her chest. Like the worst part was over. And maybe, for her, it was. She kept whispering apologies, quiet and trembling. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I nodded once. Not because I accepted it. Because I heard it. She waited. I could tell she was waiting for something familiar. Anger. A raised voice. A demand. Even forgiveness. Anything that meant we were still playing the same game. But I stayed still. The longer I stayed quiet, the more her expression changed. The hope in her face started to falter, replaced by confusion. Are you okay? She asked carefully. I exhaled slowly through my nose. I looked down at our hands. Her fingers were wrapped tightly around mine. Her grip was desperate. I thought about the last few weeks. The over-explaining. The sudden affection. The way she watched my face like she was checking for cracks. And I realized something strange. She wasn't just confessing to betrayal. She was confessing because she believed she was still in control of the timing. That she was choosing honesty before getting caught. That she was taking responsibility. That this moment could still be shaped into redemption. I looked back up at her. I have a question, I said. She straightened slightly, eager. Anything. My voice stayed calm. When did you plan on telling me? Her face tightened. I don't know. Soon. I swear. I couldn't keep living with it. I nodded slowly. She sniffed, wiping her cheeks. I didn't want secrets anymore. I watched her for a long beat. Then I said, quietly, you know I already knew, right? The words landed like something dropped in water. Her whole body went still. What? She whispered. I didn't repeat it right away. I let the silence expand. Her grip on my hand loosened slightly, like her muscles forgot what they were doing. What do you mean? She asked again, voice rising. I tilted my head a fraction. I mean. I wasn't hearing this for the first time tonight. Her mouth parted. For a second she just stared at me, like she couldn't process the sentence. Then, no. It came out almost childlike. No, you didn't. I nodded once. I did. Her face drained of color. Her eyes darted across my expression like she was searching for the emotion she expected to find. Anger. Grief. Anything. Instead, there was only calm. How? She whispered, barely audible. How could you? I shrugged slightly. It wasn't hard, I said. You weren't exactly careful. Her breath caught sharply. She pulled her hand back as if it suddenly burned. She sat frozen, arms wrapped around herself. You knew? She said, louder now, disbelief cracking through her tears. You knew for how long? I hesitated just long enough for the answer to hurt. Almost a month. The air changed completely. It was like watching the ground vanish beneath her. Her eyes widened. Her lips trembled. Her voice came out broken. A month. She shook her head rapidly, as if the motion could undo reality. No. That's not possible. Why didn't you say something? I held her gaze. I wanted to be sure. Her brow furrowed, panic bleeding into anger. Sure of what? I answered honestly. Sure that it wasn't something I was imagining. Sure that it wasn't a misunderstanding. Sure that what I felt was real. Her breathing turned sharp. So you just, what? You just acted normal? I nodded again. I watched. She stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Her voice rose. That's not normal. I didn't flinch. Neither is lying to someone you live with. That hit her. She recoiled slightly, like I'd slapped her. Tears spilled again, but they looked different now. Not confession tears. Fear tears. You let me sit here, she whispered. You let me cry and tell you everything. I let you tell the truth, I said quietly. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked around the room like she needed something solid. Her hands trembled again, but now it wasn't guilt. It was shock. You were being so, she started, voice cracking. You were being so kind. I nodded slowly. I know. Her eyes flickered with something almost horrified. Was that fake? The question hung heavy. I thought about it. About how I cooked dinner. How I listened. How I held her when she seemed overwhelmed. It wasn't fake. But it wasn't what she thought. It wasn't fake, I said carefully. It was, me making sure. Making sure of what? She demanded, voice shaking harder now. I swallowed. Making sure that I wasn't going to stop loving you over something uncertain. Her face twisted. I don't understand. I leaned back slightly in my chair. I didn't want to leave thinking I'd thrown everything away because of suspicion, I said. I wanted to know it was real before I let it die. She stared at me, eyes wide and wet. The room felt cold now, even with the heater running. You waited until you didn't love me anymore, she whispered. I didn't answer immediately. Because it wasn't that simple. Love doesn't shut off like a switch. But something does happen when trust breaks. Something final. I waited until I knew, I said. Her lips parted. She looked genuinely terrified now, not of being exposed, not of losing the relationship. But of realizing she had been too late. That the confession hadn't saved her. That she hadn't controlled the ending. I thought, she whispered, voice collapsing. I thought you didn't know. I didn't, I said softly. Not at first. Her shoulders shook. And when you found out? I held her gaze. I started saying goodbye. Her face crumpled completely. The tears came harder. But they weren't the same kind of tears anymore. They weren't cleansing. They were panicked. Because in that moment, she understood something I'd known since the night I closed her laptop. The betrayal wasn't the confession. The betrayal was the month before it. And no amount of honesty at the end could change the fact that I'd already been living in the truth alone. She looked at me like she was staring at a ghost. Like she couldn't believe I was still sitting there, calm and breathing, while everything she thought she still had was slipping away. And in the silence that followed, the relationship finally felt like what it was. Not broken in a dramatic explosion. But already gone. Just waiting for someone to leave the room. She didn't stop crying. Not right away. She sat there with her face in her hands, shoulders shaking, as if grief could rewind time. I watched her for a long moment, feeling something heavy but oddly quiet inside me. There was no satisfaction. No thrill. Just an emptiness that had been forming for weeks and was now complete. She finally looked up. Her voice was raw. Please, she whispered. Don't do this like this. I blinked slowly. Like what? Like you're already gone, she said. I didn't answer. Because I was. She stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. I can fix it, she said, frantic now. I can fix it. I swear. I'll do anything. Her hands reached out, hovering near me, unsure if she was allowed to touch. I stayed seated. Calm. Still. You already did what you did, I said quietly. That doesn't have to be the end, she begged. People come back from this. I nodded once. Some do. Her eyes widened. So why can't we? I looked at her then, really looked. She was the same person I'd loved. The same face, the same voice. But the trust wasn't behind her eyes anymore. It was gone. And without trust, love becomes something fragile and painful, like holding water in your hands. I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering, I said. Her mouth trembled. I would prove it to you. I stood up slowly. The movement startled her. She took a small step back like she wasn't sure what I was going to do. But I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to throw anything. I wasn't going to punish her. I just walked past her toward the bedroom. She followed immediately. What are you doing? I opened the closet. I pulled out a bag. "I'm packing," I said simply. Her voice broke. "No. No, don't do that. Not tonight." I didn't respond. I folded shirts with steady hands. Each one felt unreal. Like I was watching myself from somewhere else. She stood in the doorway, crying harder. "You can't just leave," she said. "I can," I replied softly. "That's not fair," she blurted out. I paused for the first time. I looked at her over my shoulder. "Fair?" I repeated. Her face crumpled. "I didn't mean." "I know," I said. "And I did." She stepped closer. "Just talk to me," she pleaded. "Just stay and talk." I exhaled slowly. "We did talk," I said. "Tonight." "That's not," she shook her head. "That can't be it." But it was. The thing about quiet endings is that they feel unbelievable to the person who expected noise. She wanted a fight. A meltdown. Something that meant the relationship was still alive enough to burn. But I didn't have fire left. Only exit. I packed slowly. Not theatrically. Just, carefully. The essentials. A few clothes. My charger. Some books. The longer I packed, the more desperate she became. She kept saying my name. Kept asking questions she already knew the answer to. "Where will you go? Can we please sleep on it? Can we just, not do this right now?" I didn't answer most of them. Because answers invite debate. And there was nothing left to debate. Finally, she sank to the edge of the bed, wiping her face with trembling hands. Her voice was small again. "I thought you loved me." I stopped. That sentence always sounds like an accusation, even when it's grief. I turned toward her. "I did," I said honestly. Her eyes filled again. "Then how can you leave?" I held her gaze. "Because I did," I repeated. Not did love her. Did leave. Already. In the month of silence. In the patience. In the moment I realized trust wasn't something I could force back into existence. She looked at me like she couldn't understand how calm I was. I couldn't fully understand it either. Maybe my anger had burned out privately. Maybe the worst pain had already happened in that quiet space where I knew and she didn't. I zipped the bag. The sound was loud. Final. She flinched. "Please," she whispered again, voice barely there. I stood with the bag in my hand. For a moment, I thought I might say something dramatic. Something that would give her closure. A speech. A lesson. But real life doesn't always offer that. Sometimes the lesson is just absence. I walked to the front door. She followed like she couldn't help it, barefoot on the cold floor. Her arms wrapped around herself. "I can't believe you're doing this," she said, shaking. I turned the knob. I paused. Not because I was unsure. Because I wanted to remember the feeling of choosing myself without cruelty. I looked back at her one last time. "I hope you figure out why you did it," I said quietly. Her face broke again. "Don't go." I opened the door. Cold air rushed in. And I stepped out. The hallway smelled faintly of someone else's dinner, someone else's normal life. Behind me, I heard her voice one more time, choked and desperate. "Please." I didn't answer. I didn't slam the door. I just closed it gently, like ending a conversation you can't continue. That night, I slept somewhere unfamiliar. And the next morning, when the sun rose like nothing had changed, I did the only thing that made the ending real. I blocked her. No message. No warning. No explanation. Just silence. Because sometimes silence is the only boundary that can't be negotiated. And even then, in the quiet after everything, I could still feel the unease lingering. Not about whether I left, but about what it meant that she hadn't seen me leaving until I was already gone. The first few days after I left didn't feel real. People think heartbreak looks like sobbing on the floor or drinking in the dark or rage texting at 2 in the morning. For me, it was quieter. It was waking up somewhere unfamiliar and reaching for a phone that didn't have her name lighting up the screen anymore. It was putting on clothes that still smelled like the apartment. It was standing in front of a mirror and realizing my face looked the same, even though my life had changed shape overnight. I stayed with a friend at first. He didn't ask many questions, which I appreciated. He just gave me a couch, a blanket, and space. The world kept moving. Cars honked outside. People laughed in coffee shops. The bakery downstairs probably kept filling the stairwell with sugar and warmth. And somewhere inside that normal life, I was just removed. The strangest part wasn't missing her. It was missing the version of reality I'd had before I knew. Because once betrayal happens, you don't just lose the person. You lose your own past. You start replaying everything, wondering what was real and what was already fractured. I kept thinking about that month. The softness. The sudden affection. The way she held her phone like it could burn her. At the time, it had felt confusing. Now it felt obvious. Guilt has a sound. A rhythm. And once you recognize it, you can't unhear it. I didn't tell many people. Not because I was protecting her. Because I didn't want the story to become public property. I didn't want advice from people who treat betrayal like entertainment. Leave her. Ruin her. Expose her. Get revenge. None of that appealed to me. I wasn't trying to destroy her life. I was trying to reclaim mine. Still, silence has its own weight. Some nights, I'd lie awake and wonder if I'd done something wrong by not exploding. Was it healthier to scream? To cry? To demand answers? Or was calm just another kind of denial? I didn't know. Even now, I'm not sure. Her friends reached out once or twice. Not directly accusing, but cautious. Hey, are you okay? What happened? I kept my responses short. It ended. I'm fine. I could tell some of them thought there was more. There always is. But I wasn't interested in building a courtroom. I wasn't interested in being right. I was interested in being done. She tried to contact me in the first week. New numbers. Emails. Messages through mutual friends. I didn't read them. That wasn't strength. That was survival. Because I knew if I opened one crack, emotion would pour through. I would see her sadness and start remembering her as only sad, not as someone who chose to lie. I would hear her apology and start imagining reconciliation, not because it was right, but because familiarity is addictive. People underestimate that. Comfort is a drug. Even when it's poisoned, you crave it. Blocking her was the only way to make the ending solid. A clean cut. No lingering thread. And yet, even with the silence, she stayed in my mind. Not as a villain. As a question. The hardest part of betrayal isn't always anger. Sometimes it's the way it makes you doubt your own instincts. I'd catch myself staring at strangers in grocery stores, wondering what they were hiding. I'd hear couples laughing at a table nearby and feel something tight in my chest, not jealousy, but disbelief. How do you ever relax inside love again when you've learned how easily someone can smile through secrets? I started thinking about trust differently. Before, I thought trust was something you built like a wall. Brick by brick. Years of shared routines. Years of choosing each other. I thought once it was built, it held. Now I realize trust is more like glass. Strong, invisible, taken for granted. Until the moment it shatters. And once it breaks, you can't put it back together without seeing the cracks. That's what I couldn't accept. Not that she made a mistake. People make mistakes. But that she lived inside that mistake while still taking my hand. That she came home, kissed me, asked about my day. While carrying someone else in the background. That duality haunted me more than the act itself. Because it meant she was capable of splitting her life in two. And if someone can do that once, what stops them from doing it again? I know that's a harsh thought. Maybe unfair. Maybe remorse changes people. Maybe therapy changes people. Maybe consequences change people. But I wasn't trying to become her teacher. I wasn't trying to be the person who stayed long enough to find out if she could be redeemed. That wasn't my job. The guilt she carried belonged to her. I carried enough already. Still, moral clarity isn't as simple as people want it to be. There were moments, weeks later, when I'd remember her crying at that table. Not performing. Not manipulating. Just breaking. And I'd feel something complicated. Not regret about leaving. But sadness that it came to that. Sadness that love can exist alongside betrayal. Sadness that people can hurt the person closest to them and still mean it when they say, "I'm sorry." That's the part no one wants to sit with. Everyone wants clean categories. Good person. Bad person. Faithful. Cheater. Victim. Villain. Real life isn't that tidy. She wasn't a monster. She was someone who made choices she didn't want to face until she had to. And I wasn't a hero. I didn't leave because I was stronger than everyone else. I left because staying would have turned me into someone I didn't recognize. Suspicious. Watchful. Constantly checking for proof. That would have been a different kind of ruin. Sometimes leaving isn't punishment. It's prevention. Over time, life began to fill back in. I found a new routine. New mornings. New rooms. I stopped waiting for my phone to buzz. I stopped imagining her footsteps in hallways. The ache dulled. Not vanished. Just softened into something livable. And yet, the question remained. Not about her. About me. About what that month meant. About the fact that I knew and stayed quiet. People have asked me, later, in careful ways. Why didn't you confront her right away? And I never have a clean answer. Maybe I needed certainty. Maybe I needed control. Maybe I was hoping she'd choose honesty without being forced. Maybe part of me wanted to see how far she'd go. Or maybe I just wasn't ready to let go until I knew there was truly nothing left to hold. I sometimes wonder what she tells herself now. Does she see me as cold? Does she see me as unfair? Does she tell the story as a mistake she tried to fix, only to be abandoned? Or does she understand that confession isn't the same thing as consequence? I'll never know. And that's part of the ending too. No closure. Just distance. Sometimes I think about the moment I told her I already knew. The look on her face. Not anger. Not hatred. Shock. Like she realized the ground had shifted long before she noticed. And I think that's the thing that lingers. Betrayal isn't always a single moment. Sometimes it's a slow erosion. Sometimes the relationship ends quietly in one person's mind weeks before the other person hears it out loud. So here's what I'm left with, even now, long after the blocking, long after the apartment, long after the initial ache faded into memory. Did I handle it with grace? Or was my silence its own kind of cruelty? If someone betrays your trust, do they deserve a loud ending? Or is the quiet exit the most honest consequence of all? And if you were in my place, Would you have walked away the same way? Or would you have needed the fire first?